Hi everybody, my name is Jens Larsen. When you're working on a musical language like bebop, it's important that you check out some of the licks that are contained in that style and try to figure out what are the components, what are the musical concepts that are being used, and then try to incorporate those into your own playing. In this video, I'm going to give you 3 bebop jazz licks, and then I'm going to analyze them and give you some exercises to help you play them. And then I'm going to take the different components that are contained in those licks, and then I'm going to make 2 more licks so that you can see how you can work on improvising lines that sound more like bebop. If you want to learn more about jazz guitar, about improvising over chord changes, arpeggios and scales, then subscribe to my channel. If you don't want to miss anything, then click the little bell notification icon next to the subscribe button. This video isn't sponsored by Disney, even if I am sporting this very attractive Daisy Duck band-aid. I had a small incident yesterday when I was cutting some watermelon. Maybe it's Herbie Hancock getting back at me for stealing all his chord voicings. The examples that I'm using in this video are all D7 resolving to G major. And I think bebop as a language is really something that's focused on the dominant chord, so it makes more sense to use a progression like that. But in fact, you can use these as 2-5-1 licks as well. The first example uses some really common bebop trademarks. One of them is to use small scale runs in 16 notes to add some rhythmical variation to your lines. So in the first half of the first bar we get this part. And this idea of just using this, and I want to execute that on guitar like this most of the time. So using legato is just better for the phrasing, I find. If you want to make an exercise to get better at playing these kind of things, you can actually do this through a scale position, especially if you're playing 3 notes per string, then you'll get something like this. And that's really easy to practice. You can try it through a few positions. You don't need to spend really a lot of time on it. As long as your pull-offs are sort of up to it, so then that'll probably work quite well. After the 16-note trill, so we're coming out on the A, and now I want to go to the third of the dominant, so the F sharp, and that's on the 1 of the next bar, and I do that with a chromatic enclosure, so like this. And from here I'm just playing the arpeggio, so the D7 arpeggio, but what I'm doing is that I'm using octave displacement. This is something that's done quite often in bebop. I have another video where I talk about this in a bit more detail, but the idea is quite simple. If you're playing an arpeggio, you can at any point move the rest of the arpeggio an octave in any direction. So in this case, the arpeggio originally would have been like this, just descending from the third. But instead I'm going up. I'm moving the D up an octave, and then I'm skipping from the F sharp up to the D, and then playing from there. And here I then do another thing that's also quite common for bebop, is to use the augmented triad on the dominant to pull towards the 1 chord. And since I'm coming out on the A here, I can go to this B flat, which is called the flat 13, and then play the augmented triad, and then resolve that to the 9 of G major. The second example is starting on the C, so the 7th of the D7, and then going up to D, and from here it's descending in a triplet down the E minor 7 arpeggio, and then skipping up to A and running down the scale. And then we get a trill on the root and the flat 9, down to the 5th, and then a leading note for the 3rd. And then from the 3rd I'm skipping up to the flat 9 again, down the scale and resolving to a B. So this last part is again using the same octave displacement idea, because if I had done this whole phrase before it resolves to the B, it's actually coming out of G harmonic minor, so that's like a minor dominant in fact. And that would have been, but then we displaced that an octave. And in the beginning we have this triplet movement with the arpeggio, so I'm playing a scale note, then going up 1 step in the scale, and then I'm playing down, sweeping down to play the rest of the arpeggio. And you can practice that and turn that into a scale exercise like this. Another thing that can be useful to check out, because it's used quite a lot, is this trill. So in the line I'm using this one, but you can also just do that through the scale just to get used to it and practice your legato technique for that, and that could be something like this. playing the diatonic 7th chords as triplets is something that's very typical for bebop. And that's also how I'm starting the third example. So I'm using the F sharp half diminished arpeggio on the D7, because that's the arpeggio from the third. I'm starting with a leading note, so there's an F, and then I'm of course going up to the F sharp and playing the arpeggio as a triplet, ending up on the 9, which is of course an E on the D7. And from here I have a small chromatic run. I'm back on the E, and then I'm reaching down to take the C and sliding down to the G, and then I have this small sort of a C major line, going to the flat 9 of the D7, so the E flat. And then again using octave displacement, I play this diminished arpeggio, which is then the diminished arpeggio found on the third of D7 in G harmonic minor, which is an F sharp diminished. And then I'm ending with this sort of typical bebop phrase where I'm resolving to the B and then ending on the one end. To help you work on playing arpeggios like this, I have this small exercise in this position. So what I'm doing here is just I'm playing for each string, I find an arpeggio, and then I'm playing the same type of arpeggio because the difficult part is probably to play sort of the one note per string figure that we have here. So first an F sharp half diminished, then a C major 7, then a G major 7, and then a D7. Now let's see if we can make some new lines using some of the ideas that are covered in the first 3 licks. If we take this last idea with playing the arpeggios as triplets with a leading note and then use that on a D7, then that could be something like this. And now that I'm here, I can use the idea that I talked about in the first example, where I'm using sort of this 16 note scale run. So now I have, and then we can of course just go down the scale. And now I can go to the F sharp and then play the same idea that I did in the second line, so, but then up here, and then resolve to the G. So now we have, for the next example we can start with the trill idea. So if I start here, that could be something like, and then a small scale one, and then an A minor 7 arpeggio. And as I had in the third example, the F sharp half diminished arpeggio, and I can resolve that to the D, and then add a small tag by going from D to A. And then we have this line. So the idea is here, of course, that you try to identify the small building blocks of the lick and then try to get those into your playing. So that can be the 16 note trill, like, and then play that another place in the scale. Or the other trill, which was 16 note triplet, so. Or we can do the arpeggio played with a triplet. So all these building blocks you can use to create your own lines that sound more like bebop. If you want to check out more stuff on jazz harmony, music theory, chord voicings and stuff like that, and this is the first time you see one of my videos, then subscribe to my channel. I have a new lesson coming out every Thursday, and I've been doing this for quite some time, so there's already a lot of stuff to check out on my channel. If you want to help me keep making all these videos, then check out my Patreon page. I have a small community on Patreon that help me and support me financially, so I find the time and also find the money to keep on making all these videos. And I'm very grateful for all the support that they're giving me. That's about it for this week. Thank you for watching, and until next week.